The title of the message this morning is called A Simple Napkin, and we'll be looking at John 20, verses 1 through 10 briefly here. The passage that we'll be looking at details the greatest miracle that ever occurred on this planet, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This was a verifiable dead man who came back to life. And you can just think of all the verified witness accounts that we pin most of our faith on. They serve as evidence that Jesus was killed on Friday and he was dead. There was no doubt about it. And they still witness that he stayed dead on Saturday. And then you have even more witness accounts that later saw him alive. For instance, in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. And he wrote those words more or less 20 or so years after the crucifixion. So some of the people who outlived Jesus by 20 years, they could vouch that, yes, we saw him die and we also saw him later alive. There's so many different wonderful evidences that the Bible gives us. And when you explore each one, it's sort of like a doorway that allows us to learn the details of these events that took place. There's so many details there that it would take us a long time to focus on all of them. So for a service like this, we more or less have to pick and choose what we look at. But what I've noticed has fascinated some people for maybe the last 15 years or so is this folded napkin that John mentions in his gospel. I don't believe it's mentioned by Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And when at first you read through John's gospel in John chapter 20, you may not pay much attention to it. You know, the grave clothes were off and there was this hand cloth or this napkin, whatever, that was folded and so forth. And you might not pay a lot of attention, but after further reflection, you might think, there's got to be a reason for it to be included in the Bible. So what is that purpose? So we'll go and read just the 10 verses of John 20. And if you're following in your pew Bible, you will find it on page 768. So reading in John 20 from 1 through 10. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. May the Lord's blessing be added to the reading and the hearing of his holy word. So if you have a computer at home, you may have seen this story circulating, like I said, maybe the last 15 years or so. And it explores this, what they call a folded napkin. Some translations say napkin. Here it says a cloth. More or less, it was probably the size of a hand cloth, and they would lay it over the face of the dead body. And this story that circulates around tries to add some significance to that story. And if you've never heard that story, or if you don't have a computer, well, if you don't have a computer, I'd say God bless you, because it saves you a lot of grief, for one thing. But this is This is the upshot of the story. Supposedly, they say there was a ancient Jewish custom where if the father left the dinner table in the middle of eating, but he intended to come back, he would fold his napkin and place it there as a symbol that he would be returning, and everybody knew what that meant. So in this story that circulates around, they say that Jesus was signifying that he would return again, his second coming, by carefully folding that cloth or that napkin that covered his face in the tomb before he left. It's a heartwarming story, and we like to think that it adds some further affirmation that even back then Jesus knew that he would be coming back. But there is a problem with that story. And the problem is that there are no confirmed, reliable historical documents that speak to such a custom. Anytime you read this story, they never tell you where they got this information from. And just saying, I found it on the internet, isn't reliable historical document. Now, I think of it this way, and maybe there was some kind of a custom that just wasn't recorded. That is a possibility. But I know if I have to get up from the table in the middle of dinner, go to the bathroom or whatever, if I forgot something, I have to grab something, I'm not so much going to leave a subtle hint. I am going to tell the family around the table, I'm coming back, so don't think it's going to be a funny joke to eat my food or to hide something or whatever. It's not going to be very subtle. I hate to pour cold water on the story that is so heartwarming like this, but I just don't know where anybody came up with this supposed Jewish custom made into a fanciful story to add to the Bible, because you will also find, if you try to scour all the sources out there, you'd be hard-pressed to find any mention of such a story before about 2007 or so. Seems like around that time somebody came up with this. And like I said, it's not confirmed, doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I know if I want to believe something, I want to be assured that it is correct and true. So, is there significance to this folded cloth or this folded napkin? Yes, I believe there is significance in every detail that the gospel writers included here. So, furthermore, I can tell you that a little after the story came about, I was taking some seminary classes, and it sort of popped in my head that, hey, I'll ask a seminary professor about this. Maybe he's heard something about this. And the man that I met, I picked him out because I knew that he had spent many, many years studying with Jewish rabbis in an effort to learn the Hebrew language that much better, and especially to understand the Old Testament. He never heard of the custom. And I asked him, well, what's the significance in John's Gospel then? And he said, as far as I can tell, it simply signifies Jesus wasn't in a hurry. That's about it. He didn't have to get out of the tomb right away. And to me it makes sense, because Jesus already defeated death. He knew that there was no concern about being arrested again, being killed again, because he already overcame all of that. Now, there may be some confusion in the translation too, because what we read as a folded cloth or a folded napkin can also mean wrapped up too. And it's sort of like whenever you get out of bed in the morning, you throw off the covers, they're sort of crumpled up or in a lump. So it very well could have been like that, and I admit I'm speculating here, but it very well could have been that Jesus' dead body is lying on the concrete slab in the tomb, and at the moment when God breathed life into him on that Easter morning, it is possible that once he was alive again, maybe those bedclothes fell right down through his body. Because we know that after the resurrection, Jesus was able to pass in and out of rooms without opening the door. We know that the stone was rolled away, not for Jesus to get out. He very well could have passed through the tomb, but the stone was rolled away so that we could see in and see the evidence that he wasn't there. Again, I'm speculating a little there. I sort of think like the rapture, for instance. People say whenever that happens, it may be just like in a twinkling of an eye, your body disappears. Well, gravity's going to make your clothes fall right to the floor in a crumple, sort of wrapped up in a sense. This is the difference between the resurrection of Lazarus that happened not too long before this instance here, and Jesus. Lazarus walked out of the tomb with his bedclothes still on him, but not Jesus. And the difference is that Lazarus was still a man, and Lazarus still would have to die again at some point, but not so with Jesus, because again, he overcame death, and his grave clothes remained in that tomb. One more interesting note before I close out here, and I think is significant, is that sometimes, and this was a actual verified custom, sometimes they would bury a rich person without this cloth or this napkin over their face. And a poor person, they would put it on almost as the last bit of shame or something for the way that they lived their lives. If that's the case, then we can see that Jesus shed this last connection to earthly poverty as he, in an instant, became our victorious King whenever God breathed life into him. He overcame the status that sinful men often try to bestow upon others. I am up here, and I'm rich, and I'm wealthy, and you're down here, and you're not as good as I am. Well, Jesus overcame all of that because he rose from the grave and is alive today. Maybe you've heard of this custom that may not be a custom that I talked about, and maybe you had not heard of it before now. But no matter what, there is significance in every single detail of the resurrection story that is recorded for us in the pages of Holy Scripture. The resurrection of Jesus is such a captivating story because of the truth behind it. This really did happen. Like I said, eyewitness accounts. He was dead. A few days later, he's alive. There's no way to spin it any other way. We don't have to spice up the story with some legends and add everything else to it. So I just want to close with this. I just think if any of us were in the shoes of Mary or John or Peter, the ones who approached the tomb that morning, the significance of that cloth or that napkin would be all too obvious. The significance is Jesus isn't in the tomb anymore. That is what they knew more than anything. And that is the greatest news that anybody ever could have heard, which is why they ran and told everybody that they knew. So what I would like to do now is take maybe a couple minutes to sit down and we can have some silent prayer right where you're at. And then after maybe a minute or two, I will then pray for us, and then we will sing 493.